when guests step into the queues, they're stepping into the story at that moment.
You never want to have an instance where you've got a super cool interactive in your queue that it actually starts holding up the operations of the ride.
They will consider the weight of the queue compared to how the main show made them feel and what they got out of it. Yeah, right. Was that 2-hour queue worth that ride?
It's also exciting too, because we're kind of setting this universe for guests. So it's kind of cool.
Hey everyone, Audrey DeLong back with you for another episode of Experience Imagination. We have an excellent episode lined up for all of you. Speaking of lines, nobody likes to wait in them. It's the one thing I dread when I go to a theme park. But you know what helps? An engaging queue. One of my all-time favorites is the E.T. Adventure at Universal Studios Florida. It's really immersive, and it does a great job of setting up the ride. Plus, Steven Spielberg himself tells me that E.T. needs my help. I'm on the way, E.T., I'm coming. I also love the movie, so that plays a part, I'm sure, nostalgia and all. I've walked through a queue just to explore that space, and then I skip the ride. I won't call out which ones, but I'm sure there are people listening out there who are nodding their heads. For this episode, I'm bringing in 3 experts for a Q&A to walk us through queue design. No fast pass needed. We'll have my colleagues, Jen Pritchard and Eric Loperena, up first. Jen is a technical director and Eric is a design director. Then Emily Sodnikar, a project planning manager at Falcons, will share how mathematical insights helped minimize those pesky wait times. Also, Nathan Sandoval, our applications administrator, was willing to answer my lightning round questions, so stick around for that. Cue the transition. Different spelling, I know. Well, hey there, Jen.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
All right. And Eric, hey there.
Hi, how you doing, Audrey?
I'm good.
Yeah.
How are you?
It's good. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, same here. We had you on both pretty recently. First of all, before we get really into the queue conversation, let's start with Jen.
Okay.
What is your favorite queue and why?
First thing that came to my mind is the Queue of Forbidden Journey. It's overwhelming how detailed it is. And when you're a fan of that IP, when you're a fan of Harry Potter, walking through the Hogwarts castle, it's like, it's unlike anything you've ever seen. And it's everything that you've ever dreamt it would be. I just don't get tired walking through it every time I go.
Right. All right, Eric, how about you?
It would be the Flight of Passage from Avatar over at the Animal Kingdom.
One.
Yeah, it's an incredible queue. It mixes a little bit of outdoor and indoor, going through the bioluminescent forests of Pandora.
So cool.
It's such a beautiful queue. It's really immersive. You've got the rocks overhead. And then when you get into the tech, when you get into the labs and the testing labs and stuff, and to see a Navi in the tank, I mean, it's a life-size to scale thing, and the little details within the queue as well with the lab tests. It's just so immersive, and it's just it really sets up the story for what you're going to do on the adventure. So,
it does, yeah. Really good stuff. Mm-hmm. All right, so you've both been with Falcons for about 9 years, right?
Yeah.
Has it been that long?
It has been that long.
Yeah. So you have a lot of experience when it comes to theme park design, attraction design, but in what ways do you utilize your creative experience in the queue design?
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, it's finding interesting ways to utilize tech that help enhance the placemaking and the storytelling. So, whether we're wanting to use Pepper's Ghost in a pre-show in a really, really cool way so that it makes guests feel like they're there with the characters in a physical space, or it's, having certain moments within the queue that we add audio elements or small lighting moments that really kind of bring the area and the space to life a little bit more.
Yeah. Explain what Pepper's Ghost is for the
so
listeners.
Pepper's Ghost is ages-old illusion trick that essentially uses a mirror to give the effect of either a physical object or a projection or media of some sort that makes it look like it's floating within the space. Mm-hmm. Haunted Mansion is a great use of Pepper's Ghost for the entire ballroom scene, but it's a trick that goes back decades, if not hundreds of years in theatrical storytelling.
It's crazy we're still using that.
I know, and
tech.
it works. It really works.
Right.
Very.
Yeah. I would say, honestly, there's three things that I always think about. It's like establishing the story, establishing the narrative. You want when guests step into the queues, they're stepping into the story at that moment, right? Also engaging the senses. When you're going through this queue, it should be really immersive. Engaging the senses, these people are in line for a while, right? Sometimes. So it's good to have things to look at. Hidden Easter eggs are always a good thing as well.
Yeah.
Get creative with that. Just keep guests occupied.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do remember a time when not a lot of money was spent in queues. There was really not a lot of thought that was put into it. It's kind of gone through a revolution. So how do you explain that revolution? Why are millions of dollars being spent maybe on just one queue?
I think that in this kind of current age, people are a lot more impatient when you've got entertainment that sits in your pocket and you can access entertainment at any point in time. People don't necessarily want to focus on something or their surroundings if it's not engaging for a very long, period of time. So
Absolutely.
you almost have to, every time that a guest pulls out their phone or is doing something, they're taken out of the experience. And so I think that is kind of, in my opinion, that's the biggest driver for a lot of the effort that's put into queues is you want to keep people engaged in where they are. Don't let them pull themselves out of the story, but really make sure that they're in the environment, they're in that world that you've created. So that way, when they're ready to get on the ride, they're in the right mindset and in the right place.
I agree. I think that it's funny when you think about, I'm going to date myself now, of course, but things have evolved. So, I remember going to Back to the Future over at Universal Studios. The first time I actually was in a queue where I felt like, wow, this is, I was a kid, of course, but I remember thinking to myself, Doc is actually talking to me. And you've got the actual actors on screen and you see this whole thing. And I think that the film industry and what's gone on with attractions over the years have become more complicated. They've become more complex. A lot of the attractions from yesteryear, they were based on either an IP within the park or it's just, it focuses on the ride. Now they're more story driven. With film industry and all these other industries getting involved with IPs that are popular, people know the story. They come in expecting to see that story. And I think that that's a big part of it, or to experience the story.
And it becomes more complicated to produce the queue, probably.
Yeah. You're measuring up to, big budget films, and even if it's animation or anything like that. People's expectations are pretty high. You mentioned, the Harry Potter universe before. It's a huge IP.
Yeah.
Super fans from Harry Potter, they want to live in that world, and that's the cool thing about the opportunity we do is we get to create these worlds where you feel like you're in the story.
And guests go when they are fans of those, those IPs and they're fans of those universe. They have expectations and they will look at things a bit critically because they have a level of expectation that they're expecting, these developers and these theme parks to meet. And so there's also like certain things that they're looking for within the queue. They're looking for the pensive in Dumbledore's office. They're looking for the mirror that leads into the Gryffindor common room or the painting. And so there's all of these certain things that you have a big job as a designer to meet some of those expectations.
It's also exciting too because we're kind of setting this universe, for guests. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Right.
And with that, it is a little bit of a delicate challenge when you're working with these very, well-known IPs and sometimes very heavily guarded.
Yeah.
And it's a really close collaboration, not just with the attraction, but with the environment that you're building with the queues, that close collaboration with the IPs to make sure that it's looking exactly as we want it to look.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about maybe regional parks or some parks that don't have the big Disney and Universal dollars. Obviously, not every queue can be $1 million, not even at those parks. I'm sure there are some examples of lower budget. So how do you design for when budget is like a big consideration, you don't have a lot of dollars for a queue, what do you do in that case?
Creativity is key, right? Sometimes, depending on what the IP and the story is, it might just be getting creative with existing content or existing assets that are in the real world that you put things together and it becomes something else. If something's like, let's say, is a steampunk design, go to your local hardware store. Kind of get stuff together, get creative with the design. If you're actually designing it and you're putting it together, say, oh, well, that's going to be a plumbing pipe with a conduit and a facet, and you're just going to kind of put this together and boom, you have something that looks like a pipe that's coming out of the wall, throw some LED tape in there and you've got something that glows and pulses through the wall. It's really just getting creative with the resources and the budget that you have. And I think that's kind of like So those are always the challenging projects. I think sometimes those are some of the most satisfying as well.
Yeah.
Because if you could create something that out of nothing that exists,
Yeah.
and it's just the secret,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
the guests don't,
Right.
then it's always that little you believe
How
that?
did they do that? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
Or
so,
I've never seen that before.
yeah, and that just comes from years of experience of problem solving on the field sometimes.
All right, so last season, I don't know if you two remember, we did an entire episode about the psychology behind attractions, which I highly recommend listening to, by the way. So I wanted to ask you two, how does psychology play a role in queue design?
I think psychology plays a huge role. Guests are a little bit impatient these days. They want to get to their experience and they want to move on to the next experience. And I think one of the big keys about queues is that you don't want to make guests regret waiting the time that they wait in order to get to the attraction, because they will consider the weight of the queue compared to how the main show made them feel and what they got out of it. Yeah.
Right.
Was that 2-hour queue worth that that
Exactly.
ride? And so that's why I think it's really important to make the queues engaging and make it worth their while. That's why I think those blocks of switchbacks in a room where you're just looking at the same 4 walls gets very, very boring after a while, and kind of will make people lose their sense of time, and not in a good way.
No.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
plus, if they've been on the ride many times before, they're really not paying attention to the queue at that point,
Yeah.
right? I've seen so many people hold up their phones. There's a game. I don't know what
Yeah.
you
Yep.
It's just how they pass the time. Whatever helps them pass the time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm thinking, is this their first time on this attraction? Because they should really be paying attention
Yeah,
to
right?
what's going on in the queue. What do you have to say, Eric?
There's an old adage that unoccupied time feels longer than occupied time. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So when you're doing something or you're waiting, of course, time feels like it's going forever. So I think as far as the psychology of a person in line, that leads to frustration when you're sitting and waiting and you get frustrated. So I think it's kind of a masterclass in psychology when you think about it, because you're taking somebody that could be, okay, I'm waiting forever for this ride, and you're introducing something, you're preoccupying their time with something else. Introduce something that distracts them.
Yeah.
And I think distraction is key. It's also setting up the narrative for what's happening in the attraction, in the actual ride itself, because I feel like the queue is definitely part of the attraction nowadays. It's not, it's not a waiting game anymore. I think it's important for psychology. That's a big part of the psychology of queue design, I think.
Yeah.
So kind of making people think they're in line for less time than they actually are.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yes, yeah.
That's a magic trick.
Yeah,
That
it is a magic trick.
It's the magic trick.
Yeah.
It's one of the things when people leave an attraction, one of the coolest things I think is if you have a well-executed queue. When they leave the attraction, oh man, that was great. But what about that when we're waiting in line and, did you see that? And blah, blah, blah. And they're talking about the queue as it's part of the attraction.
Right.
You've succeeded at that point.
Yeah.
I've seen people taking pictures in the Forbidden Journey queue.
Oh, many.
Yeah.
I have taken many a pictures
Yeah.
in that queue for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
I talked about the ET adventure earlier in my intro, and that queue expertly weaves in story. So what role does storytelling generally play in queue design?
I love the ETQ. Oh, we go just to walk in the room and just get immersed in the forest. Oh, I love that queue. It's great. Yeah, I think storytelling is huge. As Eric has mentioned before, the queue is the intro to the experience. That's where you're doing your world building. That's where you're setting up the environment that the guests are in. You're developing the story that is taking place in the attraction. You're either developing the conflict that is going to occur or in the in the main show and everything, and it really sets up the reason for guests being there, and it's storytelling is huge in queues for sure.
Yeah, it's really funny. The ET queue is one of those it's withstood the test of time. It's amazing, right?
Totally.
I mean, they did such a great job with the forest scene in there where you've got this flashlight of the vehicles pulling up, and you've got all this audio coming around about where Elliot and ET are. They're trying to find him, and the cool thing I think about that is it builds up all this anticipation for what's to come, but you never see ET in the queue. And then it sets up to tease you up great for the ride, because then you're going out there and that's the whole adventure, right? So that's a great queue. But
it weaves together so magically, the queue and the ride. You don't really see, you're getting on the vehicle at some point, but you really, it's so blurred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my husband's favorite ride.
Yeah. We're all in agreement.
Yeah.
You're changing your tune. Like, I asked you earlier your favorite, and you're like, well, maybe E.T.
Yeah.
now.
Well, it's funny. I feel like when I think about it that way, and I thought about this earlier because I was, when you had asked about your favorite queue line, and I feel like, honestly, Flight of Passage borrows a lot from E.T.
You think so?
In that way, yeah. I think, going through the forest, I had vibes of E.T. like in that it's like an elevated, updated version, right? Of course, the way you make the outside in with the forest and the trees and everything. I mean, that was all stuff that had been done before.
Yeah.
How many years? 30 years before? 40 years before? It's been a while. But good design is foolproof over the years. It's
definitely.
I agree.
Yeah. So we do design theme parks for other countries a lot. So many times their culture is very different than our culture. Is there anything you do differently when thinking about and designing those queues?
Yeah, I would say, honestly, respecting customs and traditions is a big part of what we do when we design attractions and queues overseas. Sometimes, there's a spiritual overlay that we have to respect.
Really?
And so understanding the culture will only make you a better designer for that particular country. And also sometimes we pull in, advisors at some points, but I think we've done this long enough to where we're comfortable with the areas that we work in now.
Yeah.
We've done so many in certain parts of the world that we understand those things. It's important to be sensitive to culture.
Definitely. Are there any hard and fast rules about what not to design in a queue?
When you're doing the queue design, no straight lines, right?
Yeah.
It gets monotonous when you're going in a straight line. So it's good to mix it up and to have some, breaks and, get creative with that. Just keep guests occupied. Keeping things out of reach of the scenic envelope or the reach envelope, you've got the rails and you want to make sure whatever that scenic content is stays out of reach of guests' hands. That's a big no-no when it gets into that area because then it gets worn and torn. And, even if something is built to last forever, people are creative. They find ways to break and destroy things.
They do. Guests
Unintentionally
really love
sometimes,
to, chisel their initials into rock walls and stuff.
Yeah.
They really do.
Yeah,
love
and
it.
I would also say there are instances where things are intended to be touched.
Okay.
And if that's the case, if it's an engaging, interactive experience,
Yeah.
you just want to make sure that it's really solid and it's robust, so it's not something that can break easily. So
Yeah. When we're talking, interactives that are meant to engage people, that's what you want people spending their time doing, not picking at the cups on the table or peeling off the graphics on the walls, things like that. If we can design something that really captures guest attention on a thing that is meant to be interacted with by guests, that's definitely something more preferred than picking at scenery that's placed.
Or, writing graffiti on walls.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Jen and Eric were here.
That's right. We were.
Of course, erasable.
Yeah. And sometimes it adds to the experience. I can think of Kong, when they're in the city and some of those street things with the brick wall or somewhere where people just start to add graffiti and it's like, look at that.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention one ride. I won't call it out by name. It's at a big theme park in Orlando. And it's more of a kiddie ride. So I can understand the designer's intent to have something kids can play with, but there's something in this line that's very loud. And it's this constant children just pulling levers and just like bing, 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 bing. And you're just kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know if that was the right choice.
There are other things to consider, and we always consider at the stage when we're starting to select what the content is that lives there in the queue is strobes and any kind of sensory things that might cause issues for guests. We're always sensitive to that as well. It's hugely important. So it's something else we always consider. Disabilities and any kind of challenges like people have. You want to make sure you avoid those.
Yeah. You always have to make sure or understand and remember that guests are going to be waiting in these rooms, specific rooms for 15 to 45 minutes or more, and are you designing the space where they're not going to hear the same spiel every 3 minutes? And are they going to start to get a little bit resentful of the, the content that you're displaying? So always also within the queue, designing the show within the queue to be new and fresh, and also making sure that you're timing those for when, you're expecting guests to move through the space, and making sure that there might have experience those shows 2 to 3 times instead of 15 times. And so that's also something that's very important to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I want to ask you one last question. What advice do you have for aspiring theme park designers when it comes to designing queues?
I would say push boundaries. Don't be afraid to take risks. That is how some of the greatest designs come to fruition. We talked about our favorite queues. If you look really at Flight of Passage in Pandora, I can only imagine a bunch of designers sitting around a table looking at this incredible film that was made, looking at this incredible universe that was created, this world that was created, saying, how can we make this a reality? And somebody saying, hey, I want to do the floating mountains and how's that achieved?
Right.
I mean, somebody could have easily said, yeah, no, that's not possible, and marked it off the list. But because they pushed boundaries and they weren't afraid to take risks, they were able to create something that's just absolutely incredible when you go and it's an engineering marvel.
Yeah.
And so I think risk taking and pushing boundaries, I think, is huge. You could always pull back later, but if you don't push, you never know how much you can actually accomplish.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of blue sky development. We blue sky for the attraction. We might as well do it for the queue.
Yep,
yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things, we've talked on storytelling a lot, and I think something that's really important to keep in mind is that with the push to have a lot of these experiences be very IP driven, I think it's really important to remember to design the story and design the space as if you are a super fan, and then also with the lens as if you've never experienced or known anything about the IP, and that it's still fresh, and that it's still engaging. You can hide those Easter eggs around that if someone is a super fan, they'll recognize, but you also want to make people who are approaching this story for the first time comfortable within the space and not seem like they are completely missing everything that's happening around them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Well, we made a lot of good points in this conversation, and I appreciate you too. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Audrey.
It's been great.
Hey, Emily, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Audrey. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you back. I want to ask you first about your role and sort of how that plays into queue design. But as I mentioned in my intro, you are a project planning manager. What are your responsibilities in that role? And then how does your job relate to queues?
My job kind of falls at the intersection between the creative teams, the architects, the master planners, the operations. Really, I focus a lot on the data and the metrics behind our designs. One of the big involvements I have with queue designs is helping our attraction teams determine things like how long our queue needs to be, how many guests we need to fit in there, even, the special things that queue may need, like lockers or an express pass system, things like that.
Okay.
Really trying to think more about the operations of the queue and also giving them some more numbers and data so they'd know how to start their designs.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to talk math in a little bit.
Excellent.
Just as a forewarning for our listeners, don't tune out. It's going to be fun math. So what steps are generally involved in planning a queue?
I think once you're thinking about queue design, you already have an idea of what kind of attraction you're going to be designing. Are we looking at a roller coaster, a dark ride? Are we indoors? Are we outdoors? Just those high-level kind of basis of the design. The next thing I think is story. Where are we? What do we need to teach the guest? Do we need to tell them anything about characters they may meet on the attraction or, why we are where we are? And so the story will kind of shape things like how many scenes you have in the queue, where we may want to go if we need a pre-show, things like that.
Okay.
And then lastly, once we start getting into the physical planning, we'll look at things like the desired wait times. One thing that I will help our designers with is determining how much space each guest is allocated. So in some countries, guests are more comfortable being closer to one another, but in other countries, culturally, they like their personal space. In the US, we kind of like our personal space. So then we'll really get down to the metrics of how many people do we need to accommodate? How long does this queue need to be? And then, like I had mentioned, any special considerations that the queue will need, like if we have some kind of premium pass system where we'll have 2 queues, if we need lockers, if we need a child swap, just all of those operational things to make sure that the queue can actually function. Then you put all that together and hopefully you have a good design queue at the end of the day.
Can we quickly tell non-parents out there what a child swap is?
It's funny you say that because I was mentioning that I was doing this podcast with my husband and he was like, what is a child swap?
Yeah.
So a child swap is typically for attractions that have a height restriction and a kid may be too short to ride the ride, but the parents want to ride it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the opportunity to walk through the ride as a family, and then one parent will wait with the kid while the other parent rides, and then they don't have to wait through the whole line again. They can just go to a special room, essentially swap parents or swap the kid.
Okay.
And then the other parent will get to ride the ride almost immediately. So industry term for our viewers.
Parent swap sounds less insidious, I guess.
I guess.
All right. So how do you balance immersion with practicality in queue spaces?
There is a fine line, in my opinion, between, having a really immersive and interactive queue versus having kind of a standard practical queue. Just because, you never want to, there's another industry term for you guys. It's called starving load. It is when basically you have a ride vehicle in the station and nobody to get on it. That's like operator nightmare.
Oh.
So you never want to have an instance where you've got a super cool interactive in your queue that it actually starts holding up the operations of the ride.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see parks, especially the really amazing parks like Disney or Universal, have really immersive queues with animatronics of their own, really great scenic and media. And I think they're really understanding that guests are spending more time in the queues than they are anywhere else and really trying to make that a memorable experience for them as well.
Yeah, they want to be engaged, but not that engaged.
Yeah, I mean, queuing is a common guest complaint. Working in ride operations in the past, it's really common for guests to see a 75-minute wait and be really upset that they spent all this money to come to a park and they're only getting to ride a handful of things because the lines are so long. I can understand that. And that's why you're seeing kind of the introduction of some virtual queue systems, some premium passes, express passes. Everyone's trying to, avoid the queues, but they're really important at the end of the day. And so I think parks are making the investment to make their queues just as exciting as the ride.
Yeah, there's a science to queue design. It involves numbers, which you alluded to. So since you are a numbers person, talk to us about that aspect.
The first number that is really important when looking at attractions is the THRC, which is the theoretical hourly ride capacity. It's basically the number of people that can ride the ride in an hour. It's a very common industry metric, and you can kind of think of it as like the flow rate almost of how many people are getting on the ride, how many people are dispatched every dispatch cycle, and how many people can experience that in an hour. That will determine your demand. And then you can use calculations, like I was saying, the desired wait time that you want to design for, whether it's 60 minutes, 75 minutes, 45 minutes, it depends on the kind of system. And the area per person to say each person is taking up, 5 square feet, 6 square feet, depending on where we are in the world. That will give you the area that your guests need to have to be able to walk in. We need to fit as many guests as we say we do. There's a lot of logic that determines how long your pre-show needs to be, how many people you can fit in your pre-show. Because if you're releasing, 100 people every 30 seconds, but your ride is dispatching 100 people every 20 seconds, there's 10 seconds that no one can get on the ride and your load is starved. So there is a lot of math behind the scenes to get the designs to work out. And it's not a one-way street. The creative team will come to me and say, we have written a pre-show that's 2 minutes long. How many people do we need to fit in it? What size do we need to make this room? What size do we need to make our ride vehicle? It's very much a two-way street in terms of collaborating on these metrics.
Yeah. So you're almost guesstimating how popular an attraction is going to be based on how long you think people are going to be in that line. And then from there, you kind of extrapolate lengthwise, or like, do you go by yards, feet, like how long that queue line actually needs to be?
Yeah, we'll go by, square feet for area, length. It depends, meters or feet. The metric's all the same. And I think it's interesting that you say that we have to kind of guesstimate the demand, because I think that's spot on. And you'll see it in parks where maybe they guesstimated incorrectly, and you have the operations person with the stick and the wait time post of end of line here, and they're all the way down through the park circulation. And that just means that they don't have enough queue for the amount of people that want to go on that ride. Yeah. And unfortunately, that means you're waiting on the sidewalk sometimes.
Okay, well, yeah, I hope I don't have to do that, but I can think of really long lines, and we'll talk about those. But yeah, you mentioned things like FastPass, but beyond virtual queues, what role can technology play in better managing or reducing wait times for people who don't want to fork over all that money?
Yeah, it's understandable. You know, the financial impact of the skip the line passes definitely can weigh. Sometimes they're more expensive than a park ticket.
Yes.
I think parks are really trying to weigh the virtual queuing. You know, how do we take the queuing out of the theme parks while realizing that it's so practical sometimes that it's hard to do so? I think there are some attractions that are trying to do some interesting things. One off the top of my head is Dumbo at Magic Kingdom. I'm not sure if they still do this, but at one point they would give the parents a pager when they would get in line, and their queue was like a playground for the kids. So the parents could sit, they'd wait for their buzzer to go off like a dinner reservation, and the kid would just be playing on the play set. And I think that's really cool that they understand who their attraction is for, and they're giving a unique way of queuing, still having people wait, but, you know, not standing in lines in the heat. I'm sure the parents can be pretty appreciative of that.
All right. So, well, what further innovations can be explored in this area to enhance the guest experience?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see how parks that are starting from the ground up are doing it versus how, you know, legacy parks are trying to adapt their current queues to be a virtual system or a premium system versus new parks, how they start operating. I'm interested to see how Epic Universe's queuing system works. I know they have a handful of attractions right now that are on a virtual queue system, like the Ministry of Magic. And I mean, even without the virtual queue, that queue in and of itself is a spectacle.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah, it is cool.
Let's get back to your role, because a role like yours might not be something that immediately comes to mind when people think of themed entertainment, and I want a career in that industry. So did you enter this industry knowing that you wanted to do this type of work?
I didn't know that what I do was a job, but it kind of checks all the boxes of the type of job that I had always said I wanted, which was, I mean, for context, I studied mechanical engineering in college. I have a very technical upbringing, but I always felt that I was a little too creative to have a technical job and a little too technical to be in a fully creative job. And so I always wanted something that was kind of in the middle. And if you told younger me, like, hey, this is the job that you're doing, she would say, like, that's my dream job. So,
wow.
It's cool.
It sounds very satisfying.
It is.
So, Emily, before we started recording, you mentioned something to me that you want to talk about?
Yeah. So for people who are really interested in learning about queue lines and queue designs, I would recommend this video that was done by the YouTube channel Defunctland. They did essentially a documentary length video on the history of FastPass, but they talk about queuing logic, and he does this really interesting simulation with this park that he calls Shapeland, and about...
Not a real park?
I don't want to spoil it.
Oh, okay. All right.
No, it's Shapeland, and talks about queuing and how FastPass and Express Passes impact queues. It's really interesting, and I think that anyone who's kind of interested in looking into the science behind queues should give that a watch when they have 2 hours to spare.
2 hours. I was going to ask how long that was.
It's a hefty one. It's almost like a movie, but I think it's cool.
All right. Well, Emily, this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now it's time for our lightning round, where I have a quick conversation with one of our Falcons. I am with Nathan Sandoval, who is our applications administrator. Hello, Nathan.
Hi, Audrey.
First question. You are an IT professional, but if you did decide to leave IT, what profession would you choose?
If you asked me, I think 4 years ago, I would have said animation, but right now I'm going to school for electrical engineering.
Oh, okay. What is your favorite theme park queue?
Rise of the Resistance or Maybe Spider-Man ride on Universal.
Oh, okay. Old school.
Yeah.
I like it. When you're feeling low, what kind of music do you listen to?
I want to say lo-fi or new age music by Enigma.
I love Enigma.
Really?
They are one of my favorites. I have like all their music. Okay, we'll talk after. Which of these animals would you most like to come face to face with in their natural habitat? A great white shark, a king cobra, a grizzly bear, or a lion?
Maybe King Cobra. Just
The right answer is none of the above, and now I know you're insane.
I was trying to keep it in my head.
Okay. If you can live anywhere on Earth, where would it be?
I want to say in the tropical side of Mexico or Philippines, being Bohol.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Lovely, lovely. If you were an actor and you were cast as the lead in a romantic comedy, who would you want as your co-star?
I feel like that's a trick question sent from my wife.
She won't listen to this.
As co-star, I think she'll forgive me to say Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I can get on board with that. If you had to ride one particular ride 20 times in a row without stopping, which one would it be?
I want to say Haggard's.
I could see going on that 20 times in a row.
Yeah.
Nathan, thank you so much for joining us on Experience Imagination.
Thank you for having me.
I learned a lot about designing cues today, and I hope you did too. Thanks again to Jen, Eric, and Emily for joining me for that discussion. And Nathan, thanks again for answering my lightning round questions. We'll see you all next month for an all-new episode. Thank you for listening to Experience Imagination, a Falcons Creative Group production. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. Be sure to check out falconscreativegroup.com and follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you have ideas for future episodes or just want to drop us a message, send an email to podcast@falconscreativegroup.com.